It is very clear that no one should follow an illegal order, but it's very murky when you look at what is an illegal order. And if you go into morally, ethically, that's a pretty tough thing to look at and say, how do I navigate this?
I mean, look, if you're going back to Nuremberg, right, that, well, they told me to do it. That's why I murdered people.
Look how she's characterizing our U.S. military forces, our Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and Space Force. We just want to make sure they're not going to act like the Nazis at Nuremberg. And now she's like, oh, what's happening in Venezuela? Now she's going to say, well, you know, Trump, we can't say him blowing up the boats is lawless because then we might well get hit with a sedition charge. But what if Trump actually invades? What if Trump does a bunch of hypothetical stuff he's not yet done? A bunch of speculative stuff in the future. Blatant propaganda. In these videos, they were not simply reacting to events because there was no event where Trump or anyone in this administration issued unlawful orders. They were actually shaping a narrative. This is how it works. By repeatedly implying that Trump issued illegal commands without proving he ever did, they engineered an emotional frame in which he already appears guilty. The goal was not to establish facts, but to saturate the public consciousness with the idea that Trump is a dangerous, vicious criminal that would force our active duty service members to commit illegal acts. This approach mirrors classic propaganda techniques, repetition, where a claim is echoed so often it begins to feel true, association, where Trump's image is constantly paired with illegality, and chaos. This is all very technical. And it's done in this technical way because it demonstrably works. And now it's being applied to our own nation. NH for Trump, New Hampshire for Trump, writes, Maggie Goodlander, one of the six, and her crew know exactly what they're doing. They went on camera telling the military to ignore unlawful orders, but they can't point to a single unlawful order that President Trump has ever given, not one. So what are they really doing? They're planting the idea that the commander-in-chief is illegitimate before he even gives an order. That's not protecting the Constitution. That's conditioning the military to question the chain of command based on political rumors and partisan talking points. Anyone who's ever served knows how dangerous that is. You don't play games with the chain of command. You don't inject politics into lawful authority, and you damn sure don't tell service members to second-guess orders you can't even name. This is the same tired routine we've seen for years. Make up a threat, scream democracy, and then act stunned when the president calls it what it is. Let's be honest here. When elected officials publicly suggest the military should resist a sitting president without any evidence or specific unlawful act, that crosses a line. It undermines civilian control of the armed forces. It fuels mistrust, and it pushes this country into a place these politicians won't ever have to pay the price for, but young service members will. They don't care about the E4 who takes their rhetoric seriously and ends up facing a UCMJ charge. They don't care about careers destroyed. They care about scoring points on Trump. The kind of messaging from people in office isn't brave, it's reckless, it's destabilizing, and yes, it's seditious, which is a felony. If they actually cared about the rule of law, they'd stop inventing phantom illegal orders and start telling the truth. There is zero evidence Trump has ever given one. America deserves leaders, not agitators, and these seditious agitators must be punished.
Stating a simple rule of law would cause a president to make violent threats against a member of Congress does prove the point. If I were in the Navy now, I would want to hear with clarity and with conviction that members of Congress had my back. And it's a simple thing, you know, an oath to the Constitution, a basic rule of law that is so utterly American that you follow legal orders and legal orders only. That's who we are as a country. And for this president, it may be...
So she's not really saying anything useful, but it just occurs to me, if I mute this and I just play it, doesn't she sound like the HR manager telling a room full of 48-year-old IT managers that, listen, it's very difficult, but we're actually replacing all of you with third world migrants, and we're going to require you to train them to do your jobs. before we let you go with 2 week severance. You know, and I know it's difficult, but I'm sure you'll go on to bigger and better things. And please turn in your laptops and your door cards before you leave the building, and there's security to escort you out to your vehicles. Dear Lord. All right, here's my buddy. Oh, and Kurt had something to say about this too. Kurt, by the way, was in the military. He's, I think he retired as a full colonel. He was in Kosovo and some other actions, so combat veteran. He was also involved in the, he was called up during the LA riots over the Rodney King arrest. Kurt writes here, anyone in the military retarded enough to listen to this person deserves every miserable thing he's going to get. She doesn't care about you. And if you're stupid enough to think she does, I believe bad things should happen to you.
Example you just had. You have American citizens being unlawfully arrested by ICE officers. They are prohibited from arresting American citizens. If they do that, that is not part of their official duties. And when they use excessive force, like the example you just have, that's a violation of state law. That is a crime. That is either kidnapping or assault. And what we need to see a lot more of is local and state police standing up, not to protect the ICE officers from when they're doing their operations, but to protect Americans from ICE, which is acting like a lawless, rogue militia going after and terrorizing our communities. You have
so, of course, there's zero evidence of any of this that he's talking about here. And of course, ICE immigration officers are not just immigration officers. They have general law enforcement capacity and authority. So they're allowed to make an arrest for any violation of the law that happens in their presence, or if it's subject to an arrest warrant, or just like any other law enforcement officer. Now, their mission is immigration. But if you physically attack an ICE officer, you've just committed a felony. He can arrest you for that felony, even if you're an American citizen. So this notion that ICE can't arrest American citizens is nonsense. They can arrest you if there are grounds for arrest. It doesn't matter. You're not unarrestable because you're an American citizen. That would obviously be ridiculous. And whether or not force is excessive is not really something that's decided in the moment. It's decided by courts after the fact. And if excessive force was wrongfully used, you can sue and you can get money damages. When has that happened with any of these ICE arrests? Never. They've been going on for months. Where's the successful civil suit for use of excessive force? It just doesn't happen. It's also worth noting there's a court decision. I got things a little out of order here from the Supreme Court in Ray Neagle. And this involves a case of, you don't have to worry about who Neagle is. Neagle was a government official who was ancillarily involved in this case. But it involves the case of a U.S. Marshal who was providing security for a federal judge because there was concern the federal judge, he'd been threatened with attack. And sure enough, the judge was attacked. And his attacker starts beating the federal judge. This happened in California. And the marshal providing security shot the attacker, killed him. And then the state of California decided we're going to arrest, prosecute, and convict this U.S. Marshal for wrongful death, for essentially a manslaughter in this case, under state authority, California state authority. And a federal judge issued a writ of habeas corpus requiring the California prison to cough up the U.S. Marshal. And this California objected, said, no, we're a state sovereign authority. We're allowed to try even federal officers for crimes. We're going to try we believe this killing was unnecessary, was an illegal homicide. We're going to try him for that. And the federal government was saying, no, you don't have the authority to try federal officers for conduct that's in the course of their official duties. Made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court concluded the federal government was the correct position. The state authorities have no authority to prosecute a federal officer who's engaged in the conduct of his duties, even if the state thinks he did it wrong, that he used excessive force, that he killed someone unlawfully in the course of his duties. Now, obviously, if a federal officer just walks down the street and shoots a personal enemy in the back of the head, That's not in the course of his official duties. If a federal officer robs a bank, that's not in the course of his official duties. He wouldn't have any protection from state law. If he commits a DWI, he'll be prosecuted under state law. Driving drunk is not part of his official duties. But if his conduct has anything to do within the scope of his official duties, only the federal government has authority to correct that officer, not the state government. So any suggestion that local police should start arresting federal officers who are engaged in their duties is clearly lawless. Back to Kurt now. Now, this goober, Dan Goldman, who's urging this, and by the way, this is another kind of sedition, right? Except it's like revolt by state officers against federal authority when it's clearly unlawful to do that. Now, this goober, Dan Goldman, not in the military, not in the CIA. No, he's got to try a purely civilian form of sedition where he decides that the supremacy clause doesn't matter anymore. An elderly female diversity police chief, like in Portland, from whatever hellish blue city ICE is focusing on this week where they're doing raids, cannot arrest feds because she doesn't like being embarrassed by how they're showing her ineptitude and weakness. Admittedly, the local police don't have a lot to do since they aren't arresting scumbag murderers. Still, the fact remains they cannot arrest federal agents in the performance of their federal duties. Now, I'm sure some dummy is going to try it at some point, and that's going to be a problem because the feds are not going to back down. No Fed is going to allow some flat-footed diversity cop to set the precedent that a local yokel can lock up feds. That's not going to happen. The local yokel is going to get his ass kicked or he's going to get shot. But there's no situation where the federal agent is just going to shrug and say, well, I guess it's off to the hooskow for me. But this dumbass Democrat isn't going to be there to pick up the pieces after he talks somebody into doing something stupid that ruins his life or gets him killed. Oh, well, I guess we're just going to have to settle for the cleansing of the gene pool effect upon anyone dumb enough to listen to this half-wit. All right, now circle back to the progressive fascist Democrats and their unlawful orders insurrection. This guy points out, Derek Van Oden, this effort, and the effort is by Alyssa Slotkin, is part of what is called Phase Zero operations, part of operational preparation of the environment, OPE. Wittingly or unwittingly, well, she's former CIA, so it's obviously wittingly. These people are setting conditions for further operations that should scare the heck out of every American. Let's see if this is a clip we haven't covered before. Now she's doing her follow-up clips, by the way. You notice she has all the American flags behind her? That was not in the original unlawful order.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin, senator from Michigan, former CIA officer. Earlier today, President Trump threatened myself and a number of other service and veteran lawmakers with arrest, trial, and death because he didn't agree with a video we put out this week. This really isn't about those of us who made the video. This is about who we are as Americans and how we're going to engage with people who we disagree with. I would hope that people of all backgrounds, Democrat, Republican, Independent, would agree that threatening death for people you disagree with is beyond the pale of who we are as Americans. I love this country. It has given me...
Blah, 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 blah. She can't address the actual point, however, which is the seditious nature of her video and the fact that she can't point to a single call. Listen to when she tries to come up with evidence to support her video.
It is very clear that no one should follow an illegal order, but it's very murky when you look at what is an illegal order. And if you go into morally, ethically, that's a pretty tough thing to look at and say, how do I navigate this?
I mean, look, if you're going back to Nuremberg, right, that, well, they told me to do it. That's why I murdered people.
Look how she's characterizing our U.S. military forces, our Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and Space Force. We just want to make sure they're not going to act like the Nazis at Nuremberg. Is that what you think of the U.S. military?
Is not an excuse. If you look at popular culture, there's like, you watch, A Few Good Men. Like, we have plenty of examples since World War II in Vietnam.
A Few Good Men, the Tom Cruise movie, A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. That movie. It's a work of fiction, right? It's a work of fiction. And by the way, that officer was held accountable, wasn't he?
where people were told to follow illegal
Oh,
orders.
Vietnam was first they accused Trump of getting out of the draft, and now they're holding Vietnam, conduct in Vietnam against Trump. What does Trump have to do with Vietnam?
And they did it, and they were prosecuted for it. So the best thing for people to do is go to their JAG officer, their local law enforcement or a legal.
Oh my God! As if JAG officers, those are the military lawyers, judicial advocates general. As if they're not hated enough. You know how lawyers are hated in the general population? That's how most servicemen think of JAG officers. I say that as someone who came this close to becoming a JAG officer in the Army Reserves. But I was in a bad first marriage. I couldn't take the risk. I would get deployed and leave my children behind in that household. But I came damn close to being an Army JAG officer in the reserves. It looked like it would be a lot of fun. It just couldn't happen. But yeah, JAG officers. So now, not only are JAG officers already disliked, but now they're going to be the go-to person for any disaffected person in the service who feels like they don't want to disobey an order. They're going to go ask the JAG to get involved. Oh, I'm sure they're going to love that.
Officer in their unit and ask for some explanation, ask for help. And that's what we've been.
She was a CIA officer. She was never in the military. How much bandwidth do you think service members get to ask for clarification and help, understanding, explanation? Well, I'm not. These are not actors in a play having a scene described to them, and they get to say, I'm not feeling this character. Could you explain to me their motivations? No, you get the order. If you're lucky, you get commander's intent, but you're expected to carry out the order.
Advising people.
So feckless. And now she's like, oh, what's happening in Venezuela? Now she's going to say, well, Trump, we can't say him blowing up the boats is lawless because then we might well get hit with a sedition charge. But what if Trump actually invades? What if Trump does a bunch of hypothetical stuff he's not yet done? A bunch of speculative stuff in the future.
In recent days, the State Department has designated a group called the Cartel de los Soles a terrorist organization.
Which is their authority.
And they say that the Venezuelan president, Maduro, is the head of this terrorist organization.
Right.
It's unclear whether this is just a bluff or this is...
Why would it's not a bluff. She doesn't know what a bluff is. A bluff is something you make the other person you think you could do to them when you don't actually have the ability to do it. That's what a bluff is. Right? A bluff is not, I'm naming you a terrorist organization. Done. That's not a bluff. That's something you did. Everything she just described is just something the president did. It's not a bluff.
Is signaling some intent for the U.S. military to go and take military action on Venezuelans.
Is that an unlawful order, signaling an intent?
And potentially even think about taking out their problematic president.
Oh, potentially thinking about. Now he's potentially thinking about.
The United States is not particularly good at regime change.
This is so funny. This is a CIA officer. Her job was regime change around the world. That was her profession. She says, well, we're not really very good at it. But she's doing it here, right? That's exactly what they're doing in America.
Someone who served in Iraq. I will tell you, I saw that firsthand. And I think most people are pretty tired at the idea of going into another war. Who's
going into another war?
I'm calling for public hearings.
All right, she's just tiresome now. Again, it's like every ex-wife everywhere. Awakened Outlaw says, sure, her current title is senator, but everyone knows she's just another ex-CIA agent used unlawfully to interfere with U.S. politics from the inside. Once you understand that, then all of Slotkin's desperate protestations about Trump make a lot more sense. And as Data Republican, a great follow on X, writes, if you hate regime change, why are you participating in regime change of the USA? As has been pointed out, the Democrat Party has been stuffing their elected offices with ex-intelligence officers since 2018. Ask yourself why the Democrat ranks are filling up with ex-CIA officers, their Congress people, and their senators. Svetlana Lokova, who was targeted as part of the insurrection against Trump in his first term, a journalist, writes, rolling coup against President Trump. One of the key priorities of President Trump's second term is to end the weaponization of government. Punishing those who engaged in a decade-long grand conspiracy is key. The Hillary Obama Biden officials know they will be found guilty because the evidence is overwhelming. Maggie Goodlander, one of the 6 in the video, the Don't Give Up the Ship video, is the wife of Russiagate architect Jake Sullivan. And her lawfare buddies came up with a plan to argue that all of President Trump's actions are illegal, which includes the investigation of the grand conspiracy itself in Florida. This is like the Comey indictment down in Florida. So when they are found guilty, they can claim that it's unlawful and begin an insurrection with protests across the country with support from the military and the intelligence community. No kings and Don't Give Up the Ship videos are sowing the seeds of insurrection. Green Beret nap time. I thought this was pretty insightful, so I wanted to share it. He writes, I know many of you understand what certain members of Congress meant by their unlawful orders video earlier this week, but for those of you that don't, let me explain doctrinally how it was blatant propaganda. In these videos, they were not simply reacting to events because there was no event where Trump or anyone in this administration issued unlawful orders. They were actually shaping a narrative. This is how it works. By repeatedly implying that Trump issued illegal commands without proving he ever did, they engineered an emotional frame in which he already appears guilty. The goal was not to establish facts, but to saturate the public consciousness with the idea that Trump is a dangerous, vicious criminal that would force our active duty service members to commit illegal acts. This approach mirrors classic propaganda techniques, repetition, where a claim is echoed so often it begins to feel true, association, where Trump's image is constantly paired with illegality, and chaos. Again, despite there being no proof to tie this to illegality, emotional priming, meaning using fear and outrage to override critical thinking, and preemptive framing, where an accusation is planted so deeply that any later contradictions seem like mere technicalities. You see how this propaganda, this insurrection, this regime change, how well it's structured and designed? There are specific elements of execution that people tasked with these assignments are trained on that a layperson would not even know is happening. Repetition, association, chaos, emotional priming, preemptive framing. This is all very technical. And it's done in this technical way because it demonstrably works. And now it's being applied to our own nation. He writes, this is called perception management in modern intelligence operations and psychological operations doctrine. The strategy is simple. If enough people believe an unlawful order must have happened or is inevitably going to happen, then proving it becomes unnecessary. The perception becomes the reality. And frankly, folks, those of you who followed any of my high-profile case coverage, the George Zimmerman trials, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, all of them, you know that exactly this kind of operation is now done in a very sophisticated manner by people like Benjamin Crump. They've learned and adopted this kind of psychological operation where they build an infrastructure of pure propaganda and racial grievance to drive civil settlements and criminal convictions in their direction. They're very sophisticated at it. They weren't very sophisticated in the Zimmerman trial. I mean, they were very comprehensive, but they were a little sloppy around the edges, but they've become a lot more professionalized in later trials. And unfortunately, some of those trials result in actual unjust convictions of people who really did nothing wrong, sadly. And certainly they drive a lot of racial chaos and violence within our nation because people believe the lies. People believe that although George Zimmerman was properly acquitted, Kyle Rittenhouse was properly acquitted. You know, people still believe that Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed black people. Everybody Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed was a white guy. Everybody. But of course, they issue this propaganda as if it were somehow a racially motivated killing by Kyle. It was nothing of the sort. It was lawful self-defense, and there wasn't a black person shot or injured by Kyle in any way. But people just believe the propaganda. People believe to this day, even when I lecture at the FBI Academy, they believe this. I'll ask them, an audience, an auditorium full of people there to hear me talk about these cases. How many people believe George Zimmerman got out of his car to confront Trayvon Martin after Zimmerman was told not to get out of his car, and every hand will go up. It's not true. It never happened. And we know absolutely it never happened because we have the entire exchange with the dispatcher recorded on 911. So we understand exactly what happened, and that never happened. It never happened. But people still believe it's true. That's the effect of propaganda. And if they can frame Trump as an issuer, a commander-in-chief who's issuing illegitimate, unlawful orders, adequately enough, people will simply believe that's the truth, regardless of reality. And that's the danger we all face here.